The saw kicked back so hard it broke his collarbone in 3 places before he hit the ground. They still brought the Stihl 090 back to the logging camp the next morning, washed the blood off the handlebar, topped off the fuel, put a new man on it. Because in the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest in 1971, there was simply nothing else that could do what it did. The 090 was never supposed to last 2 decades. It violated nearly every principle of saw design Andreas Stihl had spent his life perfecting, and yet Stihl kept building them, long after safer, lighter alternatives existed, because the 090 wasn't made for trees, not at first. Ask anyone at Stihl's headquarters in Weiblingen today about the 090, and you'll get the same answer. Discontinued due to emissions regulations. But emission standards don't explain why every surviving 090 manual was pulled from circulation in 1992, 2 years after production ended. To understand the 090, you have to understand what happened in Germany in 1958, the year Stihl built a chainsaw no logger had asked for. Post-war German manufacturing was a religion of precision. Stihl had spent 30 years building chainsaws that got lighter, faster, more efficient. The 08 series, introduced in 1958, weighed 14 pounds and could limb a pine in under 3 minutes. So, when the engineering team in Weiblingen began work on a saw nearly twice that weight, with an engine that consumed fuel like a small motorcycle, the internal pushback was immediate. There are no photographs of the first 090 prototype. Stihl's corporate archive has pictures of nearly every saw they ever made, except this one. What does exist is a requisition order from November 1959, stamped Sonderprojekt, Special Project, requesting billet aluminum, a crankshaft with a 49mm stroke, and a carburetor assembly borrowed from a marine engine. They were building something to survive conditions no chainsaw had ever encountered. And the first place they sent it wasn't a forest. The 090 entered limited production in 1960, not in catalogs, not in dealer showrooms. It went directly to contractors in 3 countries, Australia, Canada, and the United States, specifically to operators working in what internal Stihl documents called Extremholz, extreme timber, old-growth Douglas fir, Sitka spruce, Eucalyptus regnans in Tasmania that had been growing since before the printing press. Trees with trunks 8, 10, 14 feet across. Trees that would dull a standard chainsaw bar in 20 minutes and burn out a motor in an hour. The 090 didn't sound like other chainsaws. It had a lower, heavier growl, more Detroit diesel than German precision. And it didn't vibrate, it shuddered. Which brings us to the weight. 25 pounds dry, closer to 30 once you filled the fuel tank and bar oil reservoir. For comparison, a modern professional chainsaw weighs 12 pounds. The 090 was a saw you didn't carry. You managed it, positioned it, negotiated with it, and the power, 8.6 horsepower, all of it concentrated in a 36-inch bar spinning a chisel chain at 9,000 feet per second. The Oregon chain it used had teeth the size of your thumbnail. When they caught flesh, they didn't tear, they excavated. OSHA didn't start tracking chainsaw injuries separately until 1973, but insurance records from the Pacific Northwest tell the story. Between 1966 and 1972, the 090 appeared in 19 workmen's compensation claims, involving what the paperwork called catastrophic operator trauma. 14 of those were kickback incidents. The saw would catch inside a cut, bind against compression wood, and reverse its direction faster than human reaction time allowed. Stihl knew, because in 1965, they redesigned the rear handle, adding a wraparound bracket that doubled as a crude roll bar. It didn't stop the kickback. It just gave you something else to break your wrist against. And yet the orders kept coming. Loggers kept requesting them by name, because there were cuts only the 090 could make. Competitive logging in the 1960s and 70s was timed to the 10th of a second. A crew that could drop, limb, and buck a tree 5 minutes faster than the competition could take a contract worth 6 months of work. The 090 gave them that edge. Not because it was safe, because it didn't slow down. A conventional chainsaw loses power as the bar binds. The engine bogs, the chain speed drops. The 090 had enough torque and flywheel inertia to push through compression. You could bury the bar to the hilt in wet hardwood, and the saw would just keep chewing. The engine note would drop half an octave. The whole frame would shake, but the chain never stopped moving. A logger named Clayton Reese once said, "The 090 didn't care what you thought about the tree." I found that quote in a deposition taken 3 weeks before he died. By 1971, the 090 had become something like folklore. You'd see them in logging camps from British Columbia to Tasmania, usually covered in bar oil and pitch, wrapped in burlap between jobs to keep the morning frost out of the carburetor. And you'd see the men who ran them, guys with forearms like anchor rope and a particular kind of limp from years of managing 25 pounds of torque reaction. They rarely talked about the saw directly, but if you bought them a beer and stayed quiet, you'd hear things about cuts made in snow so deep the bar never saw daylight, about trees that took 4 hours and 3 operators rotating in shifts, about the smell, hot bar oil and 2-stroke exhaust and fresh-cut cambium mixing into something almost sweet. But the 090 was changing, or more precisely, Stihl was trying to figure out what the 090 actually was. Because by the mid-1970s, the saw had drifted far outside its original purpose. Demolition crews were using them to cut through railroad ties soaked in creosote, a job that would kill a normal saw in an afternoon. Rescue teams were mounting them with carbide chains to cut through brick and cinder block. There are unconfirmed reports of 090s in Algeria and Libya, used for reasons no one at Stihl will discuss on record. And Stihl was uncomfortable. This wasn't the brand identity they wanted. The 090 was becoming something else, something that appeared in photographs with no context, held by men in no uniform, in front of buildings that were no longer standing. In 1976, Stihl briefly considered discontinuing the 090. The decision was reversed after a single phone call from the U.S. State Department. There is no record of what was discussed. So why did a saw this dangerous remain in production for 19 years? Because Stihl had accidentally built something that exceeded the boundaries of its category. The 090 wasn't competing with other chainsaws. It was competing with hydraulic equipment, with demolition charges, with tools that cost 20 times as much and required teams to operate. And Stihl understood the value of irreplaceability, which makes what happened in 1980 even stranger. That year, Stihl released the 090G. The G stood for Gewicht, weight. It was the same saw, same engine, same bar capacity, but they'd added 4 pounds, reinforced the crankcase, thickened the handlebar mounts, added a second set of vibration isolators that didn't reduce vibration, they absorbed it, turning kinetic shock into heat. It made the saw worse in almost every practical sense. Heavier, harder to start, more expensive, and loggers loved it. Because the changes weren't about comfort, they were about endurance. The original 090 could run for about 4 hours before the frame started to develop stress fractures around the motor mounts. The 090G could run for 2 days straight if you kept fuel in it. There are stories of Australian contractors running a single 090G in shifts, 24 hours a day, for 3 weeks to clear fire breaks during the Ash Wednesday bushfires. The saw they pulled out of that job had worn through the paint on both handles down to bare metal. The bar had been sharpened so many times it was 2 inches shorter than factory spec, and the engine still fired on the second pull. This is the paradox of the 090. It was brutal to operate, legitimately dangerous, a nightmare of ergonomics, and it was also loyal. In a way, modern tools, with their thermal cutoffs and safety interlocks and planned obsolescence, simply are not. But loyalty runs both ways, and by 1985, the 090 had begun to demand something Stihl could no longer give it. Emissions regulations were tightening across every market where Stihl operated. The 090's engine, a simple, robust two-stroke with almost no emissions control, was producing hydrocarbons and particulates at levels that would soon be illegal. Stihl could have redesigned it. They'd done it with every other saw in the lineup. But the 090 resisted modification. Every attempt to reduce emissions also reduced power, and a low-power 090 was a contradiction in terms. Stihl shelved 3 separate redesigns between 1983 and 1987. So what was the saw actually designed to cut? By the late 1980s, almost nothing it was sold for. The old-growth forests were mostly gone. Harvesting equipment had gone hydraulic. The 090 had outlived its context, and yet Stihl kept building them, in smaller numbers, without advertising. But they never formally discontinued the model until 1990. And this is where the official story stops making sense. Stihl's public position: the 090 was discontinued due to emission standards that took effect in 1991. Except the saw stopped appearing in dealer inventory in March of 1990, 8 months before the regulations took effect. More importantly, Stihl didn't replace it. Every other discontinued model in their history was succeeded by something. The 090 just ended. For 2 years, there was no Stihl chainsaw larger than 120 cubic centimeters. And then, in 1992, Stihl began quietly recalling the operator manuals. Not the saws, the manuals. They sent letters to distributors requesting the return of any 090 documentation for archive consolidation. They offered no explanation. Dealers who complied received a check for $45 per manual, roughly 4 times what the manuals had cost new. Most dealers ignored the request, which is why you can still find 090 manuals today. And if you compare them carefully, the German market versions versus the North American ones versus the Australian ones, you'll notice something. The German manuals contain a section, page 23, titled Einsatzbeschränkungen, Operational Limitations. It lists materials the saw should not be used to cut: frozen wood, metal-embedded timber, creosote-treated materials. The North American and Australian manuals don't have that page. The page numbers skip from 22 to 24. It was removed before printing, which suggests Stihl knew the 090 was being used for things it was never designed for. And in some markets, they warned against it. In others, they stayed silent. There's a generation of men now in their 70s and 80s who spent their working lives around the 090. You'll find them in places like Forks, Washington, and Queenstown, Tasmania, and northern Alberta. They don't talk much about the saw unless you ask directly. One of them, a faller named Martin Kopek, told me the 090 taught him something about tools, that the best ones aren't the safest or the smartest. They're the ones that let you make mistakes. A modern saw shuts down if you push it wrong, he said. The 090 just let you keep going until you figured out what you'd done. He still has his, hanging in his garage. Hasn't started it in 15 years. Says he doesn't need to. He can still hear it when he closes his eyes. Today, the 090 occupies a strange space. It's not quite collectible. Too many were used to destruction. But the ones that survived have developed a reputation. They show up on auction sites with prices that make no sense. $1,200 for a 40-year-old saw that weighs as much as 3 modern ones and has no part support. And they sell, usually within a day, because there's still a small category of work where nothing else will do. Alaska homesteaders cutting permafrost-hardened timber. Australian outback stations clearing mulga. Custom sawyers cutting slabs from urban salvage logs too big for a mill. These aren't professionals. They're individuals who've looked at the entire landscape of modern tools and decided that what they need is a 137 cubic centimeter chainsaw from 1974 that might break their collarbone. And occasionally, one of them gets hurt, and the saw moves on to someone else. Which brings us back to 1992, the manual recall, the 2-year gap in Stihl's product line, the careful silence around why the 090 really ended. One theory is liability, that by the late 1980s, the cumulative injury reports had made the 090 legally indefensible. But that doesn't explain the manual recall. Liability concerns would require more documentation, not less. Another theory, military use, that the 090 had ended up in enough conflict zones that Stihl wanted to sever the connection. But Stihl has never been shy about military contracts. The third theory is simpler, and it's the one no one at Stihl will confirm or deny, that the 090 wasn't discontinued because of regulations or liability or reputation. It was discontinued because Stihl couldn't build it anymore, not to the original standard. The saw's crankshaft was forged, not cast, a process that required tooling Stihl had phased out in the mid-1980s. The cylinder was sand-cast aluminum with a Nikasil bore. The carburetor was a Bing 48mm unit that Bing stopped manufacturing in 1989. By 1990, building an 090 to original specification required pulling parts from discontinued inventory, using tooling that was no longer maintained, and training workers in processes the company had officially abandoned. It wasn't that Stihl didn't want to make the saw anymore. It's that they've modernized themselves out of the ability to do it. Which means the 090 didn't die because it failed. It died because the world that made it possible no longer existed. There's something almost perfectly German about that. About building a tool so well, so specifically, that it outlasts the infrastructure required to produce it. The 090 was an artifact of a particular moment, when old-growth forests still stood, when a single man with the right equipment could do the work of a crew, when durability mattered more than emissions or ergonomics. That moment ended. The saw didn't. For another decade and a half, 090s kept running in places where no one from Stihl would ever see them. Maintained with improvised parts, repaired by operators who'd learned to machine their own chainsaw components because factory replacements no longer existed. And eventually, one by one, they seized, or cracked, or simply wore down past the point where even the most determined operator could keep them alive. Some were scrapped, some ended up in sheds and barns. A few ended up in museums, displayed as examples of a particular philosophy of tool design. But not all of them stopped. As of this recording, there are at least 40 Stihl 090s still in regular use. 40 saws, out of approximately 60,000 built over 3 decades. And here's what's strange. They're not evenly distributed. You'd expect them clustered in places where the saw made sense historically, but they're not. There's one in New Mexico, one in Maine, 3 in Japan, one allegedly in Morocco. These aren't professionals. They're collectors, hobbyists, people who sought out the 090 specifically because of what it represents. And when you ask them why, you get versions of the same answer. That modern tools feel temporary, optimized, designed to be replaced. The 090 feels like the opposite of that. It's hostile, unforgiving, older than most of the people using it. But it's also real in a way few tools are anymore. When you start it, you're not activating a product, you're waking something up. One of them told me he's afraid of his 090, has been for 6 years, still uses it twice a month. There's a word in German, Werktreue, loyalty to the work. The 090 was built with that kind of loyalty. It didn't care if you were comfortable. It didn't care if you were safe. It cared whether the cut got made. That's an old idea now, maybe an obsolete one. We've decided that tools should protect us, that they should optimize for the operator, not the operation. And yet there's something about the 090 that resists that logic. which is why what Stihl did in 2004 is so hard to explain. That year, they filed a trademark renewal for the 090 designation. Not for historical purposes. This was an active trademark, the kind you file when you're planning to use the name on a product. Nothing came of it. No announcement, no new saw. But the trademark is still active as of 2024, renewed every 10 years. Stihl pays the fees, maintains the legal protection, for a saw they haven't built in 34 years. I asked a former Stihl engineer about this. Off the record, at a trade show in Oregon, he looked at me for a long time before answering. Some things, he said, you don't let go of, even when you should. There's one more thing, and it's the details Stihl won't discuss. In 2011, a batch of what appeared to be new old stock 090 parts appeared on the European market. Not reproduction parts, not salvage, factory spec components with Stihl stampings and serial numbers that dated them to 2003, 13 years after the saw was discontinued. The parts sold out in 6 hours. Stihl issued a statement saying they were likely mislabeled surplus from an earlier production run, except the serial numbers don't align with any documented production run, and the components included revisions that didn't exist in the original 090. Someone somewhere made those parts, recently, to a specification that required access to the original tooling and documentation. It happened once, as far as anyone knows. The parts came from a distributor in Austria who wouldn't name his source. And when collectors and restorers started asking questions, Stihl's response was polite, brief, and final. We do not comment on parts production for discontinued models, which is not a denial. The 090 is gone, that much is certain. The saws that remain are survivors, outliers, exceptions to the rule of obsolescence. But the idea of the 090, a tool built without compromise, designed for conditions that would destroy anything softer, that hasn't died. It lives in those 40 saws still running, in the manual pages that were never supposed to exist, in the trademark renewals and the mysterious parts batches, and the careful silence of a company that spent 19 years building something it never quite understood. And it lives in the memory of men who spent decades holding 25 pounds of shuddering steel, breathing two-stroke exhaust, feeling the chain pull them forward into cuts no modern saw would attempt. They're older now, retired mostly. Their hearing is shot, and their hands shake, and they'll tell you the 090 was a brutal, dangerous bastard of a machine. And then they'll tell you there's never been anything like it since. Stihl holds that trademark, Stihl renews it, Stihl pays to keep the 090 designation legally protected. And somewhere, in Wablingen or a contract facility or a warehouse no one will name, there may still be tooling, patterns, documentation. They won't say why they're keeping it alive. But trademarks expire if you don't defend them, and Stihl has defended this one for 34 years. Which means someone at the company believes the 090 might matter again. The question isn't whether they could build it. It's what would have to happen for them to decide they should.